Welcome to Beat Diabetes, where we talk about strategies to stop your ever-increasing blood sugar and send it back down the other direction. On today's program, we'll look at a sugar-free drink that sneaks up on you with 70 grams of carbs. Talk about sneaky, and we'll see why total carbs, not just sugar by itself, is the best predictor of blood sugar rises. We'll also look at how schools and hospitals with their registered dietitians can sometimes offer terrible meals for diabetics. Coming up. Earlier this fall, our ministry conducted missions in 4 different African cities, 2 in Kenya and 2 in Nigeria. We distributed food and scriptures in each community, and we were especially eager to help the widows, orphans, and those families that had been impoverished by COVID-19. Now, some of you contributed to these missions, and we want to say a great big thank you. Ben and I did a brief video about the missions, and we shared our thoughts about how they went, and we shared some of the pictures and video clips from those missions. To see this video report of our latest African mission to Kenya and Nigeria, you can click on the link in the description below this video. All right, well, here's a person that heard me mention about somebody else finding out that a sugar-free coffee raised blood sugar way too high and had more carbs than they thought it would. So he says, the same thing happened to me at Dutch Brothers Coffee. I don't guess there are those here in Texas. I don't know. I've not heard of that. But anyway, Dutch Brothers Coffee. He says, I ordered a sugar-free beverage. I asked explicitly, now this is 100% sugar-free, right? And they told him absolutely sugar-free. He said, but after drinking it, I had that old familiar feeling that I get after eating sugar, and the thought that this is too good to be true. I went back through the drive-thru and I asked if I could please see the labels on the products they use to make my coffee drink. Kind of a bold request, and I'm kind of surprised they allowed it, but he says they actually obliged me. And on further inspection of the sugar-free product, I learned the beverage I had just consumed had over 70 grams of carbs in it. Sugar-free, but 70 grams of carbs. He says, so be careful and be diligent in your own behalf. And the question is, how many carbs does something have? Not how much sugar does it have. How many carbs? Some people say, yeah, but shouldn't you be more worried about sugar? Well, sugar is a carb. So when you say how many carbs, you're saying it has this many sugar carbs plus this many other carbs. So what's the total carbs? 70 for this drink. I don't know how they could get that many carbs in a drink that was sugar-free, but somehow they did. And he says we need to take control of our, he says be careful, be diligent on your own behalf. Now, 70 grams of carbs, folks, that's like eating 2 candy bars. Instead of drinking his sugar-free drink, they could have given him 2 Snicker bars or 2 Three Musketeers bars or 2 Twix bars or 2 whatever, 2 Hershey bars, and he could have eaten them and he would have had the same level of carbs and sugars as his sugar-free drink. So don't take things for granted. And don't assume that sugar-free is the magic phrase that means everything is hunky-dory. It may not be. Could be, might not be. Now this is wild. He says, my doctor tells me to maintain a 7% A1c, even if my A1c is now 5.3, down from 10.2. When I read that, I had to do a double take and reread it and say, am I hearing this right? He goes from 10.2 A1c, which is very bad, down to 5.3, which is excellent, especially for someone who's been diabetic. 5.3 is great. And the doctor says maintain a 7 A1c. Now, he didn't give a lot of details, but the way I'm reading this, it sounds like the doctor was frowning on the idea of him getting so low and suggesting, don't worry about trying to get into the 5. 7 is good enough. Well, 7 is not good enough. 7 is just harming yourself every month, you're doing damage to your body. Granted, it's a slower damage than if you were at 10. So if you gave me the choice, you're going to have an A1C of 10 or an A1C of 7, I'll take 7 any day. But if you say, well, you don't have to accept 7, you can get down to 6, or you can get down to 5.5 or 5.3, then I'll go for that. Now, I will say this, it's possible, and like I said, he doesn't give a lot of details, so I don't know. It's possible the doctor was concerned about perhaps he was taking insulin or a high-powered medication, and if you ate too few carbs, it would drive your blood sugar too low, so the doctor was nervous. This guy's going to get a hypo and maybe even sue me or maybe even die, and his relatives sue me. So, you better make sure you take the carbs to match your medication or take the carbs to match your insulin. Well, here's a novel idea. How about lower the carbs and lower your insulin? Or lower the carbs and do away with your medication if, the doctor sees fit. Sometimes we've been under the assumption that, yeah, I'm going to get insulin or I'm going to get high-powered medication to squeeze all the insulin they can out of my pancreas. So I've got to be sure and eat enough carbs to match up with the fact that I'm going to have a lot more insulin going on. How about taking less medication or less insulin and then just don't eat so many carbs? But somehow, some doctors haven't quite figured that one out. It's kind of like a man who tells his doctor, I just love to eat sawdust. I just eat sawdust every day. I work in a lumber mill and I scoop up a big bag of sawdust and I bring it home and I just snack on sawdust all night long. The doctor says, that sawdust is not good for you. It's going to hurt you. It could kill you. But lucky for you, I've got an antidote for sawdust. You drink this before you eat your sawdust, and it'll go into your stomach and dissolve all that sawdust and flush it out of your system. So if you eat your sawdust, you be sure a little bit before you eat that sawdust, you drink my medication. It will dissolve your sawdust, flush it out, and all will be well. So the guy does it for a while. It seems to work. But then after a while, he comes to the doctor and says, well, how have you been doing? He says, well, I've been doing fine, but I had a thought. I decided I really don't need to be eating that sawdust, and I gave it up entirely. And the doctor says, what? The guy says, yeah, I've given up sawdust. I don't eat sawdust at all. The doctor says, you have to eat sawdust. The guy says, what do you mean I have to eat sawdust? Why do I have to eat sawdust? He says, because you're taking the medication that's going to dissolve the sawdust and flush it out. And if you take that medication and you don't eat any sawdust for that medication to work on, it's going to rot your gut. So by all means, go home now and have a big helping of sawdust. Well, doc, there is another way. Just stop taking the sawdust medication and then you're fine. So don't demand that your patient eat sawdust just so it can match up with the medication you're giving him. And likewise, don't demand that your patient eat a lot of carbs just to match up because you're giving him a lot of insulin. If he lowers the carbs, lower the insulin. If he lowers the carbs, lower the medication. Just match them. But by all means, allow your patients to get those A1Cs lower and to stop eating so many carbs. So anyway. Here's a person who says, I like your attitude about carb assessment for an individual diet. There are times when we just can't go totally keto, circumstances that may dictate that we consume high-carb foods. So it's a good plan to limit quantity there. For example, pizza night at a church fellowship. Should I eat or should I not eat? Prudence should tell you maybe a small portion might be the best thing rather than mounting on your keto high horse, refusing to dine with friends and enjoying the fellowship. He says Thanksgiving Day comes to mind, birthday parties, and so forth. Life happens. God bless. Well, I agree that there are times you just have to exercise some portion control, and you find yourself in a social situation where it just seems like it would be rude. It would just not be the right thing to totally refuse. Maybe you go to a couple's house and they have missed the message that you eat low carb, and so they serve spaghetti and a salad, big salad, spaghetti and a salad. Well, the simple answer that you can use, apart from just being what I would call rude and saying, I'm not going to eat that nasty spaghetti. Do you realize how terrible that is? Do you realize what that spaghetti's doing to you? And let me tell you what Dennis Pollock says on Beat Diabetes. Well, instead of that, just have a small helping of spaghetti and have a big old monster salad. And, they may look at you a little weird. And did you notice he ate more salad than he did spaghetti? But that's all right. You ate both. They didn't fix the spaghetti for no reason. But I will also say this. If you tell people ahead of time that you either are diabetic or pre-diabetic, or you're fearful of becoming diabetic, you have health issues, or what I used to tell people is I have blood sugar issues, and I just can't eat a lot of carbs. And before I was involved with my current ministry, I worked for a ministry called Lamb and Lion, and I did a lot of traveling all over the U.S. doing church conferences. I have preached and taught in many states. And it was very common for me to get asked to people's houses for dinner. And in the early days, I ate whatever I wanted, so that was no problem at all. But toward the latter part of my time there with that ministry, I was watching my carbs, and I had my episodes where diabetes was trying to come on me. So I would tell people that invited me for dinner, and they didn't just call me up and say, "Come on over, we've got dinner ready." They would invite me a day or two in advance and so forth. And I'd tell them, well, I have blood sugar problems, so I just can't eat many carbs. So I can't eat, any sugary desserts, and I just have to watch my carbs. And I had some wonderful meals, that compassionate people fixed for me. And if you put it in that frame, that I have health issues and I just can't eat carbs the way most people do, they'll understand. They'll be respectful and compassionate. If you just act like a food snob and, well, I would never eat that nasty stuff, then they may not be so compassionate and they may not like you very much. So be compassionate, try to be gentle. But in most cases, if you tell people in advance, you can get away with it. But like this guy says, at a church dinner, you can't convince them to change the entire menu for your sake. So, if they're having pizza night and a salad, go there and have your one slice of pizza and eat a big old salad and go home. Okay, this person says our local grade school serves the kids nothing but juice, granola bars, low-fat milk, and so forth. They say that this is laid out by a registered dietitian. Well, that's sad, and it shows how far we still have to go. Sometimes when you hang around a certain crowd, you hear things so much that you just take it for granted. This is obvious to everybody. And when you get out into the real world of people that aren't in that crowd, you find out they don't think at all like you do. And some of you that are involved in watching me and interacting in the comments on Beat Diabetes and watching some of these other guys and reading Jason Fung and listening to his lectures and so forth, you kind of assume everybody ought to think that way, and believe me, they don't. So you're going to find, sadly, cases where not only do people believe different, but they enforce their beliefs, And to give them a little bit of credit, they're doing what they think is best for these kids, giving them the skim milk, giving them fruit juice. Well, it's full of nice vitamins for these little kiddos. They're doing the best they know. They're just dead wrong. They're just completely wrong, jamming these kids' bodies with sugar and carbs. So we have to cut them a little slack, but on the other hand, we need to also intervene on the sake of our kids and make sure that they understand what's good and what's not. All right, here's another example of this. He says, I spent 5 days in the hospital. I was put on a heart-healthy diet. Those ought to be a red flag, those words, heart-healthy diet, that included mashed potatoes, gravy, ice cream, white bread, and so forth. I then told them I do OMAD. I eat 1 meal a day. The nurse started her rant just as I suspected. Oh, how can you eat 1 meal a day? Don't you know? This is crazy. Nobody would do that. You're going to kill yourself. I say, you're going to kill yourself. Well, we're surrounded by ignorance. Now, to be honest, I don't do 1 meal a day, but I can see why some people would, and it has helped some people tremendously. To me, 1 meal a day is more of an intervention crisis mode where, you've just found out you've got extremely high blood sugar and you're desperate to get it down. I would say most type 2 diabetics can easily transition into 2 meals a day without too much trouble once they get it down. But if I was at 14 or 16, I'd seriously think about it, that's for sure. But you got a hospital worker telling them that they have to eat their mashed potatoes, their white bread, and so forth. We're just surrounded by ignorance. And, it's one thing to be ignorant. It's another thing to have your ignorance pushed on you, have people's ignorance pushed on you. Imagine you are having a family dinner and somebody knocks at the door and it's the police. And they tell you, well, we've heard that you're having dinner and that you don't eat enough carbs. And they come in and they look at your dinner plates. And there you are. You've got your meat. You've got your avocado. You've got your salad and maybe a little piece of salmon on there and a handful of almonds. And they say, all right, excuse me, sir. Excuse me, ma'am. I don't see any rolls on your plate. Where's the bread? I don't see any bread. Where are your bread portions? Do you not know about the food pyramid? What's wrong with you? Are you ignorant or something? And they pull out their tablet and begin to give you a ticket for not eating enough carbs. What would you say about that? You'd say, get out of my house, fella. Nobody's going to come into my house and tell me what to eat. But is that not what they do with our schools, with our nursing homes, and in so many different institutions, hospitals? And they have their dietitians that have decided you have to eat your 70 grams of carbs per meal. You have to have your 30 grams of carbs snacks in between meals and get your 200 plus carbs because somebody somewhere back down the line has said that that's what you got to do. And if you ever ask them and question them about it, well, who said that? What studies prove that this is true? They'll give you a blank stare. They don't know. They just know that somewhere in the past, somebody said you got to eat a lot of carbs. And so they're determined they're going to force feed you a lot of carbs. Well, it's just foolishness. And guess what? You have the right to say no. There's no hospital carb police that are going to come in and arrest you and throw you in jail for refusing to eat their high-carb meals. Okay, well, enough of that for now. I hope you have enjoyed this. If so, give it a thumbs up. The more thumbs up we get, the more likes we get, the more YouTube will be likely to promote it to other diabetics who are going to that search engine and typing in, how do I beat diabetes? How do I reverse diabetes? How do I conquer diabetes? So give it a thumbs up, comment if you've got something relevant to say, and we hope you'll subscribe and then click on the bell icon so you'll be notified every time we post a new video. God bless. See you again soon.